Welcome back to the Learn with Dylan podcast. Today, I have a great guest, someone I've been really looking forward to getting on, Don Oakley. Hopefully, I pronounced that right.
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah, perfect. Now, is this your first podcast that you've been on?
No,
No, you've been on a few.
on several over the last couple of years.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, for those who don't know you, can you just give us a little bit of a backstory of who you are and what you do right now?
Well, the last 15 years, I've been in Northeast Tennessee, where my wife and I have created a retreat center, and I've been doing talks here for about the last 9 or 10 years. I've written several books on spiritual awakening, hold monthly in-person retreats that are comprised of meditation and insight inquiry.
Okay, awesome. Well, I've written up 10 questions that we can run through, which I've sent through to you to go over briefly, but I'm sure there's going to be questions that arise, as you mentioned. So this podcast is mainly about understanding yourself. So we'll start from the top and work our way down. Number one is, how do you separate yourself from your mind?
Okay, so this is sort of a core question, right? What we take ourselves to be and this thing that we all experience called mind. So what we take ourselves to be is most people take ourselves to be this conglomerate of body and mind. And even though at birth we all have this experience for maybe a year or so of just awareness, just pure awareness without reducing it to words and concepts and ideas in our head. And so, but over the course of growing up, we've all sort of lost sight of that, or most of us did. And so that we've now believed that what we are is this body mind. And so part of the inquiry that's possible for those who might be curious is to really ask the question, well, what is living this life? Which is another way of asking, who is person? Who is, what's this me character about? And so the thing that seems to get us in the most trouble is not really the body so much. I mean, it can get sick, but what gets us in trouble are thoughts in our head about ourselves and other people in the world and so on. And those thoughts can cause us to suffer. So the question is what we are limited to what we think about ourselves? And I'd suggest that what we truly are is this capacity that we all have to be aware of whatever our experience is, including all the thoughts in our head. So it's not so much as attaining that capacity. It's really a recognition of the capacity that we all already have in equal measure. That is this capacity of awareness.
Okay. Great answer. I'm going to chime in here and there. I just don't want to drag things out too much because I can get yapping. So the second one is, what is the ego? And I do find that the ego can have a bad reputation. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, often in spirituality, ego gets to play the bad guy. But when we really look at it, there's no such entity lurking around inside there that we can find and point to and say, aha, there's the ego. All we do find is just beliefs and opinions and ideas and memories. We have that experience. And then ego is sort of what we apply as a concept. And then we try to get rid of the ego. But what we're trying to get rid of is a concept of beliefs that we've accumulated over the course of a lifetime. So we're fighting against something that doesn't have any ultimate reality. So the real effort is to examine those beliefs and opinions and memories of who we take ourselves to be and realize that they're all superficial to a relative degree and don't really get to the heart of the matter. And when we see that, the effort isn't really to eject this fictitious entity called ego. It's really to see that it doesn't really exist in the first place. There is this personal sense of, inhabiting this body mind and going about our daily affairs, but that's just necessary to be in this life, in this world. Ego is more what we tell ourselves about our own identification, who we take ourselves to be. And that's what can be questioned.
Hmm. They talk a lot about that in The Power of Now,
Sure.
which
Sure.
I'm sure you've studied and read.
The Power of Now is a very transformative book for me. And when I first read it 25 years ago and spent a fair amount of time with Eckhart Tolle over several years back then.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's awesome. I listen to his stuff all the time.
Yeah.
He's quite funny too. He's quite humorous.
He's very funny.
Yeah.
It's a very quiet humor, but yeah.
Yeah, I know. He's a great human being. Okay. And this is one that I can struggle with at times. How can someone tell if their thoughts are coming from their ego or from their true self?
Probably the place to start with that is just to assume that they're coming from ego, because that's where most thoughts come from. But more specifically, and any thought that has to do with justifying myself, proving myself, arguing with reality, blaming, judging, being jealous. I mean, anything in that spectrum is obviously coming from this personal sense of self. What comes from this much deeper place is much quieter than that. It doesn't argue. It doesn't justify. It's just sort of like a gentle breeze, like, maybe go in this direction. And it doesn't, if you go in another direction, it doesn't say, I told you so, or it's just, we find out that life goes much more smoothly if we just listen to that deeper voice. So it's a subtle distinction, but the more we learn to trust that deeper voice, the smoother life goes.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing, is to try and understand what that calmer voice is, because I understand that the ego is usually loud, obnoxious, erratic, and your true self is usually calm, quiet, as you said, walks forth with clarity. So it's just, I think it's just about time, and meditation can obviously help with that as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually the real purpose of meditation. A lot of people assume that it's to be a really good meditator and to reach some particular state or have a really tranquil experience. But the way I see it is that the real value of it is to watch. It gives us a up close and personal front row seat to watch our mind, just watch the whole gymnastics and mechanics that it goes through to just, in probably mostly in good faith, to make us feel okay about ourselves, and to sort of rewrite history and, create opinions about everything. But the more we can watch it, we can see that it's just a paper tiger. It's not really grounded in any reality.
Okay. And I found that this might be a bit of an obvious question, but something I've thought on a bit. So if we are only, because I've dived into the world of like Eckhart Tolle and Carl Jung and a lot of thought leaders like that. So if we are only the observer and the observer's role is just to observe without taking action, then who or what is the doer?
Okay, so this is a good question, right? What is really living this life? Where is that movement coming from? There's to get a handle on that. This observer or a witness is sort of intermediate step, right? It gives us a little daylight between where it feels like we're watching from to what we're watching. Right? We're watching our activities, our behavior, our speech, and whatever. And there's this sense of an observer. But what we find when we actually go looking for this observer is that there isn't one. There's observing, right? No doubt. I mean, we're aware of what's happening, but there's not, what we don't find is an entity in our head somewhere that's the one who's observing. It's like there's no one home. As surprising as that sounds, but there is this alive, aware, awake, observing. So then, if that's recognized, then the question, well, who is the doer then? Because this awareness isn't an inert, dead, void space. I mean, it's an alive presence, right? And so then the question is, how does that alive presence move in the world? And that's a whole different question than how do I, as a separate individual person, move about in a big, sometimes scary, objective world.
Yeah, it's very confusing. It's hard to wrap your head around. Like there's parts of it that I understand, but then when you put another shades through it, like, we are all connected, we are all one, you are me, etc. That's when it, yeah, it's just, I don't think our mind can comprehend that.
Well, that's absolutely true. Our
Mm.
minds will never understand what we're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, they'll try, but the way our minds have been taught and the way they work is to look at things outside of ourselves, like we did at school. We learned certain subjects, and we're used to learning things about outside of ourselves. But what we're talking about here is, what is that innermost, most intimate place in ourselves that's just present for whatever's unfolding. So there's no way to sort of run around and to the back of that and get a good look at it, right? It's always what's looking, no matter what it's looking at. And so that's why we can become familiar with it. We can learn to live from that, as that, but we'll never understand the just immense mystery of it. Just this capacity to be aware of this amazing existence.
It's like that. I don't know where it comes from, but I'm sure you know. It's like there's a symbol of a snake and it's eating its tail. And that's just a sign that, yeah, I can't even explain it. It's just a sign that I can't explain it. Do you know what I'm talking about? Or how?
Yeah, I think it comes out of the Mexican cultures, Ouroboros.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I'm not an expert. But the mind trying to look at this awareness, what it looks like from the mind's point of view is it looks sort of dark and scary and unknown and sort of a void. And why would anybody go there? That's from the mind standpoint. And from the awareness standpoint, it's just clarity and wake and present for what's happening. So an analogy might be that in a mountain stream, there's the headwaters of the stream that's flowing down the mountain. And what happens in the headwaters, if there's a storm there, it affects what's happening in the stream downstream, right? But from there's nothing that can happen in the downstream that can affect the headwaters. And so in that same sense, that awareness can be aware of the thoughts in our head, but the thoughts in our head will never be able to, like you said, wrap up its head around what this awareness actually is.
And that's your mind. And I've heard about that before. You'll never be able to comprehend, but our analytical mind wants answers, So
yeah, it wants answers. And
yeah.
The problem is that this awareness is as simple as it can possibly get. It's just aware, right? It doesn't have any attributes. It doesn't need to justify itself. It doesn't have any particular limits to it. And it's also not personal. And what you were saying before is about, how, when we look around, all we see is diversity. You and I look different. I look different than the tree, the rabbits, and everything else. And so when we look around, there's just diversity everywhere we look. And so if we're trying to find unity on that level, you can't really do it. You can try, but you can't really do it. But where there is unity, and actually the only place that there really is in this fundamental sense of awareness that's already present for all of us. And the awareness here is no different, not separated in any way from the awareness everywhere else. Other people, animals, trees, still conscious.
That's it. Okay. And how do you know if your thoughts, the thoughts that you're having, are truthful, part of a narrative, or skewed by a perception? Now, I do feel like this is similar to the third question, but is there anything else that you could elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, when we really look at our thoughts, we can see how much they are derived from our past experiences and conditioning, in our life up to this point. And so when we really see that, when we really see the extent of that conditioning, it gives us pause about how much credence to give to any particular thought or opinion. And, we can begin to see that it's personal. It just is unique to this particular body mind based on the past, but in terms of any kind of ultimate reality, it's just not going to be found in thought.
The next question is, what does being present mean to you?
Well, first of all, no one has ever managed to escape from the present moment. So, all the effort to try to be more present, we're always in this moment, this present moment of now. So that's helpful to realize. Then the question becomes like, well, how do I populate this moment? When we look at thoughts, we can see that thoughts relate to the future, worrying about how that's going to turn out, or the past and, either liking or regretting something that happened in the past. But it's not really possible to think about the present. I mean, you can do that, but you won't be actually present while you're doing that, because the only way to think about the present moment is to conceptualize about it.
Yeah, because
not really present.
Yeah, I think sometimes I'm trying to be present, which probably takes me out of the present. And it's like it's either you're being present or you think you're being present. And sometimes I get confused with those.
Yeah, you can get all twisted around there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can sort of either pick up your coffee cup or you can try to pick up your coffee cup.
Yeah, exactly right.
You can't do both.
Okay. And how do you get out of your head and into your body?
Actually, the body's a really good way to get out of your head. And one of the meditations that we often do at the beginning of a retreat is to just sense into the body's ability to perceive sounds, perceive a sense of sitting, perceive just any kind of tactile sensation in the body. And to do that, you don't require thought. It's just a direct perception. You don't need to think about the sound. If you're just receptive to it, then it's just a vibration. You're not having to decide whether you like it or not, or name it or not, or prefer that sound over another sound or compare it. It's just sound. And by doing that, we sort of bypass the mind, but give it enough to do that it doesn't get sleepy or bored or restless or something that it often does during meditation. So that's just a way to come into the body. And one of the things you can notice that, when we've seen that sound is just a vibration, we can let it be, sense of touch is. We can also see that thinking is, and just allow the thoughts to be there in the same way without judging them or, trying to manipulate them or decide whether we like them or not. And by doing that, they just appear to be what they are. They're just thoughts defining what we are.
I was actually going to touch on meditation. So I've been consistently meditating for a fair few months now, and I actually did a Buddhist retreat. I did that for 3 days. That was really interesting. But one thing that I have the tendency to struggle with is zoning out.
Yeah. Well, the mind doesn't like to meditate. I like the idea of meditating, but the actuality of it, the mind has certain tricks that it employs to sort of distract us. I mean, zoning out is one, getting restless, being argumentative, or getting sleepy. I mean, it's got a few strategies there.
How do you combat that? And why does the mind do that?
Because the thinking mind has been in control for a long time. And what we're talking about here is the discovery of something that's more fundamental than thought. And the mind may like the idea of it, but it doesn't want to give up its role as being the one to tell us what's true and what's real.
The narrative. Okay.
Right. It's been a manager. It's like, being a manager in an office for a while and, suddenly there's some suspicion that they might be demoted. They don't like that.
True. Okay. And do you believe that, we have different parts within us?
The two biggest distinctions would be body and mind. Body's not the one that usually causes us I mean, we might have a physical illness or injury or something, but that can be registered as pain. But what gets us in more trouble is what the mind tells us about whatever it is that's happening. It's really, in this kind of work, it's really the mind and what it believes and what it thinks is true that is most worthy of investigation. So that's two basic distinctions. But the more fundamental distinction is this awareness that is aware of what's happening in the mind and also what's happening in the body. So being willing to look at both as objects, as impersonal as that sounds, rather than it's me doing this, it's me meditating, it's me. It's helpful to just to look at the whole package as, as almost like a scientist would, objective. Without this self-judgment, it's not it's not the wagging finger.
No, yeah, no judgment.
It's just observing.
And when dealing with negative thoughts, what's the best approach from your experience? Now, I've learned a few things. My partner's actually a psychologist, and I'm very into this sort of stuff. And a lot of people give a lot of different opinions. So one will say, just say stop. Say stop, mind. Don't say something like that. But I feel like that is actually giving energy to that thought. That's making, that's feeding that thought, that's fighting that thought. And then there's others that say, oh, just observe, like what most people say. But I feel like, what about if you just said something nasty about yourself? You're letting your self-talk affect you. So or just one more, or I've tried to think, these thoughts aren't mine. So distancing myself, which I feel like has helped me out in times, but I'm still navigating through this.
Yeah. I mean, the first example, I mean, if we can just catch ourselves and see, okay, that's just an old pattern, and I don't really need to go down that path, and I'm just not going to think about that. If that works, great. But it doesn't work for the stickier thoughts, the ones that are more ingrained that we don't really understand. If we understood it, it loses its stickiness. So the second one is, generally the one that has the most long-term benefit is just to watch that. Doesn't mean that we have to act them out, right? If we have an angry thought, doesn't mean we have to spew it out of our mouth, but we can also feel that surge of energy come and be willing to look at where it comes from. Often it comes from, perhaps an underlying vulnerability or insecurity about who we are, and we feel like we need to defend ourselves. There can be lots of other reasons for that kind of energy sort of showing up. So just being able to see that and then see the trigger of it, see the physical sensation of it, see the energy of it, see the consequences of it, both for, our own internal sense of equanimity and also how it affects other people, and see that, is that really how I want to express what is most deeply true? And so it's good to really do that. And we can't really observe it if we're trying to stop it. Right. Again, I don't mean that we need to act it out, but just allowing that energy to be there. It's still energy, right? Energy is energy. And so that same energy that would maybe flow into something like anger or resentment is also energy for looking at it. And so we can sort of transform that energy into a more useful vein. But it's really being willing to look without the self-judgment. Because when we really get to looking, I mean, there's some things that we may not want to see, but we need to see if they're to be released, right? So what we're talking about isn't all fun and games. Some of it's just plain hard work, to be willing to see what we may not have been willing to see in the past. And, when that comes up, we get to choose, am I willing to see this and work my way through it? Or am I just going to try to stuff it and hide it for the rest of my life?
And some really great points there. And I do find something I've learned is that say if we did all see it at once, we wouldn't be able to handle it. So that's why over time, like things happen and like insights will come because if we felt all of our pain and suffering, we wouldn't cope.
Yeah. And in some ways, I trust the body pretty well to sort of bring those kinds of things up as we can handle it. And in some ways, when they come up, like during meditation, a memory comes up, a thought comes up, I just have the belief that that's the body's way of informing me that I may be ready to look at that.
Mm.
And like you say, it's the body won't sort of dump everything all at the same time. The mind, when it tries to scare itself, may do that, but the body won't do that.
Okay. And the final question. So how do you balance intentional language with full self-expression? Now, I try to be mindful with my words because I understand the mind records everything. But sometimes I feel like avoiding certain labels makes me feel like I'm not fully expressing or accepting how I'm really feeling. How do I navigate this?
Yeah. I mean, we all live in the society, the culture that we live in. And, there's certain rules and expectations, and we don't have to fight every one of those. Right. So, I guess the way I hold it is that whoever I'm talking to, there's a recognition that what I understand myself to be fundamentally is this spacious awareness, this presence in a sense. And also the other person is already that. I mean, their conditioning might be such that their behavior or their speech might not be something that I care to be around. That may be true, but it doesn't mean that they're wrong or bad. So it allows that underlying connection to remain there. And then the question is, okay, how do I interact with this person? I don't need to, make them wrong or bad, or it's just, I can see, if I really see the degree to which my own conditioning has affected my behavior over the course of the life and, mistakes that have been made, I should be willing to grant the other person that same benefit of the doubt.
Great answer. And I feel like learning to be more compassionate for others, you're being more compassionate towards yourself because everything you project outside is going internally as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, often the things that we object to most on the outside are things that we question about ourselves.
I understand. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much for your time today. I really do appreciate that.
Well, thank you for having me on, Dylan. I really appreciate being here.
No worries at all. Yeah, please tell everyone about your retreat and how they can get in contact with you.
Well, the name of our retreat center is Wellbeing Retreat Center in Northeast Tennessee. And we are open year round. We have retreats that we lead, my wife and I, once a month, long in-person retreats. And then we also have other retreat leaders that are skilled in their particular areas, leading weekend or longer retreats here as well. So we've been here 16 years. We're on 160 acres. We're surrounded by 2.5 miles of the Powell River. So there's lots of nature and it's really quiet. And we have comfortable cabins to stay in. So I also have a YouTube channel and also an Instagram channel and hopefully a TikTok channel.
TikTok as well. Well, thank you again. I will put all of Don's links to his social media, to his YouTube underneath the Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. So you can all grab them there. And yeah, we'll wrap it up there.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dylan. Nice to meet you.